capture. A long campaign is now.
This is the car market in Mogadishu.
NATO's military success against
many Western nations.
This is On Assignment.
Welcome everyone to On Assignment, coming to you from VOA headquarters in Washington. I'm Alex Villarreal.
And I'm Imran Siddiqui. Up first, the Islamic State militant group has been at the top of the agenda for U.S. President Barack Obama, but how's Congress feeling about his choices?
Then it's a story that's out of this world, the U.S. Space Agency's latest mission to Mars.
And back on Earth, coping with water shortages in the American West.
Then it's graffiti artists drawing praise instead of punishment.
Keep it right here. On Assignment takes off in 3, 2, and 1. As U.S. airstrikes target Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria, a debate has arisen in Washington over whether Congress should consider a broad authorization for the use of military force. Lawmakers say President Obama has the authority to order temporary airstrikes, but that an extended campaign should get the backing of Congress.
Michael Bowman covers the U.S. Senate for VOA, and here he tells me about his coverage of this debate. Check it out.
One day after the latest U.S. airstrikes against Islamic State positions in Iraq, Secretary Hagel sought to rally lawmakers behind the administration's plans to unite a broad coalition to defeat the Sunni militant group, also known as ISIS or ISIL.
ISIL poses a real threat to all countries in the Middle East, our European allies, and to America.
Mike, the fact that the White House began these airstrikes in Syria without the express authorization of Congress, what does this say about the current state of political power in Washington?
Well, above all, what it says is that Congress just returned from a month-long recess, was in town for 2 weeks, and there are elections coming up in about 6 weeks. Congress was in no mood for an extended, protracted debate that would take away from members of Congress being able to go home and campaign to keep their jobs. There was a fear, of course, among some that given that this is a Congress that probably couldn't agree on the color of the sky or on the law of gravity, that there might be an extended, protracted debate that might make the country seem divided.
Now let's talk about the arming of the Syrian rebels. You were around as the debate was occurring. What struck you about it?
Well, two things. Number one, it wasn't until the very last day of debate in the Senate, right before the vote, that the voices opposing intervention spoke out. Up until then, the only debate that we heard in the Senate was between those who thought, yes, we should be taking a more active military posture, but we should vote on authorization, a full, broad authorization, and those who said, yes, we should be doing this, but we can vote on authorization after the election. The other thing that really struck me was the utter lack of discussion about the cost of this new war. I don't think I heard more than a couple of sentences on the Senate floor discussing the long-term cost of what President Obama has indicated could be a multi-year operation.
So how are the elections playing into this with everyone in Congress, with lawmakers concerned about how their constituents view their policy choices?
If you had asked me what the deciding issue of this election was going to be a year ago, I would have said fiscal issues, the president's health care law, all very domestic themes. I don't know that the war against the Islamic State, the airstrikes against the Islamic State, are going to be the defining issue of this congressional cycle. I think that the economy still plays a huge role. But clearly, national security, the threat of terrorism, instability in the Middle East, and how America's national defense and the security of our citizens is impacted by that, that is clearly on the radar screen.
As we head into the elections in November, how important is it that the Democrats hold on to the Senate?
One could argue that in terms of major legislation, major agenda items, President Obama has gotten all that he's going to get out of this presidency. He all but admitted as much by saying that if there's going to be action on immigration reform, he's going to have to do it himself by executive order. So there is a thought in Washington that in terms of big items, it really doesn't matter whether the Republicans pick up the 6 seats that they would need to get in order to take control of the Senate, or whether the Democrats squeak by and manage to hold on to the Senate by 1 or 2 votes. There are scenarios, though, where it could really matter. Let's say that there are retirements at the Supreme Court, or a Supreme Court member dies and those vacancies need to be filled. With a Republican-controlled Senate, which has to confirm judicial nominees, the universe of people that President Obama could consider that could get Republican approval and consent would be much more constrained. With a Democratic Senate that is friendly to President Obama, he would have much greater leeway. So there are some scenarios where it could have an impact.
And that is something everyone here will be watching for, of course, as we head into these elections this November. Thanks to Mike for those insights.
And we're taking a break now, but when we come back, exploring the atmosphere of the red planet. You're watching On Assignment. The U.S. Space Agency's newest Mars probe, known as MAVEN, entered its orbit around the red planet in September. Scientists will use its sophisticated instruments to try to learn what happened to the atmosphere Mars had a few billion years ago. And joining me right now is VOA science reporter George Putish. Thank you so much for joining me, George.
You're welcome.
It took about 10 months for the Mars orbiter to reach Mars. Why did NASA send it there?
All the evidence gathered up to now points to the fact that Mars had atmosphere once a long time ago, and scientists want to know what happened to that atmosphere. Where did it go? There was evidence of water, flowing water on Mars. Where did the water vapor go? So they sent a very sophisticated space probe to check the Martian atmosphere, which is at the present 100 times less denser than our atmosphere here on Earth, to see where did it go and what happened to it.
So we know that there was water there, and we know Mars had an atmosphere. So what do you think happened?
Well, scientists think that sun is responsible for stripping it away. Sun emits a huge amount of highly charged particles that fly off its surface at high speed, and since Mars does not have the protection of a magnetic field, it does not have a strong magnetic field as Earth does, that shields Earth from the charged particles coming from the sun. Simply that solar wind stripped away the Martian atmosphere. That's the theory, but the MAVEN spacecraft has to prove it.
All right, and we know that India has been neck and neck with the US in terms of getting to Mars. What is the basic difference between MAVEN's mission and what India is doing at Mars?
It's a huge difference. Indian spacecraft is basically a technology demonstrator. They wanted to prove the concept, that to see whether they are capable of designing, building, launching, navigating through space, and finally putting a spacecraft in the orbit around the Mars and communicating with it. It also has several instruments that will also measure geological features on Mars and also Martian atmosphere. But I think basically the biggest achievement is the proof that they can do it. I think the Indian scientists will now have much easier time.
Okay, in one line, if you can tell me, do you think there will be life on Mars?
I don't think so. It's been a long time since Mars was stripped of its water and atmosphere. Maybe some very simple microbial life, but I don't think so.
All right, it'll be very interesting to watch this. Thank you so much. George Putish, VOA News Science Correspondent. Thank you so much. Moving on, we're taking a break. When we return, is drought drying up the Colorado River? You're watching On Assignment.
The Colorado River flows through 7 U.S. states. It's the primary source of water for some 40 million people in the American Southwest, but the river has been stretched to its limits, a situation made worse by a long regional drought.
VOA Steve Baragona has been to the area to cover this and talks with On Assignment's Rebecca Ward about what can be done to protect the Colorado River and the huge Lake Mead reservoir that it creates.
In Lake Mead, the level has dropped so much, you can actually see these, they call them bathtub rings, going around the rocks on the edges of Lake Mead. Lake Mead being the nation's largest reservoir, created in the 1930s when the Hoover Dam was built.
And so this one reservoir is feeding 7 states?
The basin basically flows through 7 states.
Because there's a lot of agriculture in those states.
A lot of agriculture in those states. You got California is like the nation's salad bowl. We get a lot of fresh produce from California. Agriculture is 80% of the use. Worldwide, agriculture is 80% of the water that's drawn from lakes and rivers and groundwater or whatever goes to water crops. And so the cities, the thirsty cities, are starting to look at places like Yuma, Arizona, and saying, hey, what can we give you for that water? And the farmers are getting really worried because if enough people decide to sell their water rights to the cities, that doesn't just dry up the land, it dries up the whole economy. So they've actually, the state of Arizona has this program now where they're actually paying farmers to fallow their ground. So they're saying, don't grow your crops for a year, okay? We'll pay you, we'll keep you in business, but we really need that water.
What are they doing to, I guess, counter the drought? I mean, can you counter a drought?
Well, there are some states that have been in drought for quite a long time, and they've already had to make some tough calls and do some serious things. One of the interesting things that I found is that one of the biggest users of water in the desert Southwest is for watering people's lawns. When people moved there, they moved from Chicago, from New York, from the cold, snowy northeastern states, where people usually have these lush green lawns. So they kind of brought that whole lawn culture with them. And so Nevada and Las Vegas kind of got onto this idea that if we get people to get rid of their lawns, we will actually save a whole bunch of water. And so they started paying people to rip out their lawns. I met a landscaper that this is his job. He was great because he was very passionate about the lake. He boats, he has a boat that he takes out on Lake Mead and loves to fish. And so he's really committed to this whole idea of they call it water smart landscaping.
No one is using this grass for anything. You don't see any kids sitting out here playing on it. You don't see anybody sitting out here with a blanket and a picnic basket like we're in 1955. I mean, it's just there and it's just soaking up all this water. So a huge waste of our resources, and the lake is down to 39% right now.
You were telling me before about some of the more creative ways to try to get water and involving Native American rights. That was very interesting.
Yeah, so Las Vegas is a growing city. And so they're planning to build this pipeline that's going to go 250, 300 miles to the north into these valleys that are, they're basically desert valleys, but there's enough water there to sustain certain amounts of vegetation and wildlife and some of these Native American tribes. And they're very concerned that if Las Vegas comes and starts pumping the water out of the ground, it's going to dry up all this land. And there are sites that are sacred to them that are dependent on these groundwater springs. And Las Vegas says, look, we can do this without doing permanent damage. In fact, we are legally required to do this without doing harm to other people. But it's a very emotional issue. A lot of the science is disputed. Nobody really knows how much water is down there. Nobody really knows how all the different pools of water are connected. And it's tied up in the courts right now.
Well, you have interconnection with the states, depending on this one reservoir. But can Nevada go into California? And how does that work?
Well, because all of these 7 states are interdependent on this river, they are looking at some kind of creative solutions. I mean, Nevada is actually talking about helping California build a desalinization plant.
For ocean water.
For ocean water, to take the salt out of ocean water. So there's a lot of this kind of cooperation. The saying from the Wild West was that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over. And there's actually been a lot of cooperation over water. I think because it's such a life or death issue. And people wanted to stay out of the courts as much as possible too, because that just slows everything down.
Yeah, a very serious situation there for the Colorado River, which is not just important to the southwestern U.S. This river irrigates 15% of all U.S. crops, making it critical to the U.S. food supply and food exports.
Our next story comes to us from right here in Washington, D.C., where officials have come up with an innovative program that embraces the talents of local graffiti artists.
VOA's Julie Tabo has seen this public beautification program firsthand. Take a look.
Like many cities, DC has a graffiti problem. You have people who come in and paint on walls, on buildings, public and private. Normally what happens is they go in and they whitewash it over and over again, and it's costing taxpayers a lot of money. And so what they've done is they have these workshops, and people learn how to do graffiti art, and they commission them to a wall, usually with a master artist, a lead artist who's experienced. And in about 5 to 7 days, depending on the size of the project, they'll have a complete mural done for a lot less money than it would have cost the city to keep coming and whitewashing it over and over again.
The workshop is part of a program called Murals DC that city officials have created to overcome their graffiti problem. After 10 weeks of training, most of the students worked with Eric Ricks to create a vibrant, one-of-a-kind mural on a wall which was once defaced with graffiti.
And this is a very diverse group of artists, too. Tell us about some of the places that these artists come from.
Well, Eric Ricks, who was the main feature of our story, comes from Liberia. He fled the Civil War. He's been in this country since he was 14 years old. There's also Ania Khan Udofia, who comes from Nigeria. And he too has a similar story where he has come to this country and found a great way of having his art expressed. And he's done many murals on the city. He's one of the actually best known muralists in town. And he's also conducted workshops in the past, and he really feels that this is a way of getting the message across to these young people that you don't have to do it under cover of darkness, you don't have to do it illegally. Come and let your work be seen and be praised and paid for it.
Now, you got the chance to spend a good amount of time with Eric Ricks. Tell us about him and your time with him.
Eric is a very special person. I mean, here's someone who really finds the opportunities given to him here to be the American story, the American dream.
Being an immigrant, I have to say, man, I am truly living the American dream, because it's the only place I can think of that I've ever been that you could take something so off the cuff like graffiti and turn that into something that you can live off.
He told me on camera and off camera that he never believed that he could actually be a graffiti artist and be praised for his work, recognized for his work, paid for his work, and also be a mentor to other children and young aspiring artists.
And what about your time with him? What do you think you took away from the experience?
Oh, he was so passionate, it's contagious. Just spending time with him, and especially the cameraman, Mike Cornelli, who spent time with him, because what Mike did is he set up a GoPro camera. Every day he'd go out there and set up the camera, and every evening he'd go and retrieve the camera. And each time he went, he got to spend a little time with Eric, and said he is just such a unique character. And he said he was often met with quite a lot of prejudice. People would call him N-word and a lot of racial slurs. And he said he would take that as an opportunity, instead of getting upset, to actually try to explain to people where he was from and talk about his art, talk about things that they found in common. And he said it was sort of a personal mission to, educate people and to rise above all that. And what he said, art kind of unifies us all. And his art really speaks to that. And this particular mural, he talks about these words: empathy, love, passion. And he says, I try to live by those words. And of course, this particular mural was dedicated to his daughter, whose face you'll see in the mural, who he has not seen in many years. But that's also, he said, my way of letting the world know I love her and care about her.
Yeah, so very much a labor of love doing this sort of thing. And for you and Mike as well, you spent a lot of time doing this story.
What Eric does is he sketches first. And then when he sketches, he starts the painting. He pretty much leads it, and then his apprentices come in and he will direct them as to what he wants them to do. So just to get to that point, it was a matter of weeks. And then once he started, then we were sort of on a roll. And over a course of about 10 days, give or take, We were able to, or he was able to get this terrific time lapse, very cool, from start to finish, and also spend a lot of time with the artists and the apprentices, who are very cool in their own way. Each of them has their own story.
Yeah, and I think the operative words there are very cool, because it is such a cool program, so neat to be able to see in our spaces, in our neighborhood, these beautiful works of art. There's one that I love, which features President Obama, Bill Cosby, and some other prominent African Americans. It's right by a theater here in DC. I've gone a number of times, waiting there in line, admiring this art. It's great. You should check it out.
I need to check it out. Speaking of public treasures, could a cave in central Kenya be the site of buried treasure? Or is the rumor of riches a hoax?
VOA's Gabe Joslow has that story.
This system of caves has become the center of excitement in the village of Maragushu near Naivasha, Kenya. It is not clear where the rumor came from, but some locals here believe that white settlers hid gold, mercury, and other precious metals in the cave before leaving the area many years ago. Local resident Edward Mina says the rumors have brought amateur treasure hunters flooding into town to dig in the caves.
It's not long ago that people came and they were to excavate the cave, and we don't know them. We heard them saying that in the 1800s a white man left treasures inside the caves and closed it off.
Residents say the original treasure seekers entered the cave nearly 2 months ago before being detained by police. Local authorities sealed up the entrance, but excavators broke back in. While no gold nor mercury has been brought forth yet, the cave does guard another important resource, water. Many rely on a natural spring emerging from the cave, and local officials worry the digging could disrupt or contaminate the supply. Ward Councillor Gaka Mwaniki.
There's nothing. We've seen ourselves. There's nothing in those caves. They are excavating for the first time. It's natural. It's the water table that they're interfering with.
Excitement about the cave has gotten the attention of regional leaders as politicians from nearby Naivasha town accuse one another of sponsoring the treasure hunt and unfairly exploiting unemployed youths by sending them to dig in dangerous conditions. Local resident James Mbua Njenga wants the situation brought under control.
If at all there's treasure inside there, let the government come and excavate and preserve the water table.
It might be true, it might be a hoax, or it could be part of a political game. Whatever the case, treasure hunters continue to be drawn to the mystery of the caves. Gabe Joslow, VOA News, Kenya.
And with that, it's a sad part, but we are wrapping up another edition of On Assignment.
We are, but we'll be back next week with a new show when we take a special look at former U.S. President Jimmy Carter.
And in the meantime, you can connect with us anytime through our VOA On Assignment Facebook page. And to watch any episode or segment of the show, just go to the Programs tab at voanews.com.
Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Goodbye until next time.